Change is a common theme, which has its place in time and in material value. Change is seen throughout history as a new start, a new place for growth and improvement. However, sometimes change can be a detriment. Through gentrification and outright zoning, some are unable or not willing to change with the times. Here we will discuss the change that has been seen throughout mid-Michigan and specifically in the capital city of Lansing, where change has been greeted with the new arrival of sparkling apartments and new, more luxurious stores that for some are too expensive to live in or even go to. While these improvements are seen and thought to be good for the neighborhood, what is being taken away? What is lost? Hi, I'm Jared Kinney, a student at Michigan State, and in this film we will discuss the choice of investing in outsiders to improve urban environment by beautifying the cities and forcing out residents, rather than investing into the already present environment and starting with the roots that are affected the most. It is said that new is always better. New jungle gym for the school and improvements to worn down infrastructure is never looked at as a negative because it helps people who are already living there, but does not take anything away. There is no trade-off with that type of investment. However, some residents feel as though the improvements being made to the Lansing area are not harmless at all. For instance, the wages of those living in Malcolm, Wayne, and Ingham County lagged that of the national average at 3%, while the cost of living, like Medicare, food, and energy, essentially wiped out the wage increase altogether. I was fortunate enough to sit down with a Lansing resident who could provide some insights on how this actually affects those already living in Lansing.
Yeah. Where do you usually go for your groceries?
I mean, like, the dollar store, I guess. Especially everything with like plates and stuff like that. Dollar store, Walmart. I guess Aldi, we've gone a couple of times there. But yeah, I mean, nothing really past that. The dollar store is frozen meals, and that's kind of what I eat most of the time.
So for someone like this Michigan resident, an addition of a Whole Foods or a new Meijer would be looked at like a blessing that they have been gifted. However, that is not always the case.
I mean, with anything, there's good and bad in it, It's a nice grocery store for people who can afford it, but with the folks who live around here, I mean that's not very many, and it kind of feels like they're adding things like that in strip malls with higher end stores, and it's just kind of pushing us out of here.
The issue at hand now is that there are better improvements made for food and living, but what good does that do for the residents who cannot afford these new additions? What other choice do they have than to move further away from their homes where they can afford to live, but not as comfortably? It is clear there is no opposition or denial that these types of establishments are good for the neighborhood as a whole, but they are not frugal for those who have been living in Lansing for generations. Mr. Spicer and I talked more about this impact here.
What do you mean impacted?
With all these like new apartments and kind of upper level things that none of us can afford to go to, none of us can afford to live in. Just rezoning and stuff like that, and just it makes the area harder to live in.
The true issue here, which will be further expanded on, is that there's not enough investment into the pre-existing businesses and infrastructure that have been the heart of the Lansing community and others for generations. Michigan, specifically in the last 20 years, has passed more than 15 different wage-related bills that have gone towards helping those on minimum wage. Not until the last 3 years, however, has there been any type of investment from the government into minority-led businesses, the exact ones that are being replaced by Meijer and Whole Foods. I sat down with another resident of mid-Michigan, and specifically the Detroit area, to get a better sense of what's really going on.
I live in Detroit.
Okay. What part of Detroit specifically?
I live on the west side, 6 Mile, call it the Bronx.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, in that area, how does that compare to Farmington Hills?
It's way different. I feel like Farmington Hills is way more kept up. like by the government and by like businesses. Like it's way more, I don't know how to explain it, exquisite.
Exquisite in Farmington Hills.
Yeah.
It's kind of built.
There are already as many as 6 outside capital investors with their hand in the Lansing market. The majority of the funds going to improvements like new apartments and grocery stores. Major investors see Lansing and surrounding Detroit areas as profitable land that can be flipped into something else, rather than building up what's already there. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, there seems to be a drive to kick out smaller families in these areas to make way for nicer, more expensive apartment communities, citing that the 30% of all Michigan housing is rental-based. Of that 30%, there has been an increased amount of rentals in the last 10 years that have been foreclosed upon or outright demolished. These rental properties, which represent affordable housing, are then replaced by newer apartments with higher rent rates.
Okay. And in those areas that have been like built up a little bit, has there been an increase in like rent and increase in like actually the living costs?
Oh, of course, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if you want to live in like Rosedale Park on the west side, it's gonna cost you double, maybe even more than what it costs for like to live in my neighborhood.
Right. Okay.
So if you want your kids swinging on a fully recycled, 100% organic swing set, you may have to open your wallet a bit wider to afford the prices for these neighborhoods. The actual rate of increase is anywhere from 100 to 150% the original rental rate. So who are the type of people that would live in these newer, fancier, more luxurious areas of living?
Do it now.
I would say the majority of those people are just like middle class black folks, and then like a small number is like, you know what I'm saying, maybe the white family who own the golf course around there, or like, you know what I'm saying, small business owners around like cities that are around Detroit, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. And do you think those kinds of additions are helpful to those communities, or are they driving people who can't afford them out?
No, I would say like what it does do is interrupt with the pre-existing businesses that are there. Like there are really good like farmers markets and stuff like that, like mom and pop shops type of deal. And I would like hate for like other businesses like a Myers or a Walmart to like take over and take away from like black owned businesses, essentially. You know what I'm saying? Of the residents who live there.
He and I discussed the crux of the issue. With billions being poured into new ideas, the solution is pretty simple, and so obvious that it's impressive that it has been missed for so long. The real truth is that investment in not the community, but the people who built it up, would bring the largest return on overall living and well-being. Through this, we must look at this issue through a political and economic lens. Through a business lens, it is frugal to take what doesn't seem to be working and put in a working asset. However, the assets they are replacing are actual people with lives and families. From the political view, there is a need to help those who cannot do for themselves, but unfortunately, the needs of business outweigh those who are hurting the most. According to Wharton professor Ken Smetters, the idea that trickle-down economies work for those at the bottom no longer accounts for rising inflation rates and leads to more money going to the top through tax cuts and never trickling
like, if
down.
you're going to have a Walmart, why isn't the primary investor a Detroiter if it's going to be in Detroit? Like, start building that community up within its people instead of just treating them like human capital.
Through an increase in capital reinvestment and access to outside money going into these minority-led businesses that have been the heart of so many communities and would have built this great nation, this will lead to greater improvements to these regions without forcing out those who can no longer afford to live in them. Thus, no longer being gentrification, but true, unadulterated improvement to a community of struggling people.